Every time I see this text animation while playing Donkey Kong Bananza, it just makes me happy. I love everything about it. So in this video, I'm gonna teach you how to recreate the effect inside of After Effects completely procedurally, meaning we can plug anything we want into it and it will always give us the same awesome end result. I've wrapped all of this up into an After Effects project file that you can download for free down in the description, and I've even included a Mogurt version that's completely customizable directly inside of Premiere. So if all of that sounds good to you, go ahead and like this video, subscribe if you're not already, and leave a comment down below letting me know what your favorite Donkey Kong character is. Now, let's jump into After Effects. We'll start just by making a new composition. I'm gonna go with 1920 by 1080, and I'm gonna go at 60 frames per second since video games have a much higher refresh rate, and we'll go with a duration of just 20 seconds. Now, my background color, I'm just gonna make it slightly off of black because we're gonna be using a lot of black and white, and this will just make things easier to see on that background. It's still just a transparent background. It's just the preview color for the composition's background. Now we need to type out some text, so I'm gonna switch to my text tool, and I'm gonna make a level of Donkey Kong that's After Effects themed. So I'm gonna call it Keyframe Caverns, and we'll make this a little bit bigger. I'm using the font Adlib, which I'm pretty sure is the exact font they used in the video game. You can find that online pretty easily. So that's the title, and then I'll duplicate that, move it down, and make it a little bit smaller, and we'll type out the terrain strength line, and maybe that needs to be just a little bit smaller and a little bit higher. I'm not gonna bother with the stars right now, but you will see that in the final project file, as well as the Mogurt. I'm gonna go ahead and select both of those layers and pre-compose them right away. So Control-Shift-C or Command-Shift-C on a Mac, and I'm gonna call this our source comp, and I'll click OK. And let's go ahead and organize our project just for Ben Marriott, and I'm gonna call this pre-comps, and I'll move source into it, and we'll label this comp1 DKB title. So Donkey Kong Bananza title. So let's start by recreating those polygons that show up behind the text. To do this, we're gonna use an effect that you might not have used all that often. Let's just make a new solid layer. So layer, new solid, and we're going to call this our matte layer. And then I'll click OK, and we're going to search for an effect called cell pattern. So let's drag this out to the solid, and this is just going to generate this texture that kind of looks like cells. It has some really cool controls. It's a little bit like a particle grid, and if we turn down this disperse value to 0, you can see that it's a lot like CC ball action. It's just a grid of these spheres essentially, but that's because of the cell pattern type. It's set to bubbles. Let's increase our dispersion all the way up to 1.5, that's the maximum, and change this to crystals, or actually I wanna go down to crystals HQ. It gives us a better quality version of this pattern. And this is how we're going to generate our polygons. And if I zoom in here, you can see that every side has a gradient from black to white in the middle of that pattern. And that is critical for making this effect work. Let's go ahead and pre-compose this layer as well. So Control-Shift-C, and we'll call this comp matte. And make sure to move all the attributes to the new composition so those effects stay on the solid that's being pre-composed. Let's clean up our project a little bit, grab that matte layer, move it into pre-comps. Now I'll duplicate that matte layer and just remove the cell pattern effect, so we're back to a black solid, and I'm gonna rename this gradient. And we're not gonna apply a gradient ramp effect. Instead, we're gonna apply a linear wipe effect. And if I apply that, this is just giving us a simple wipe with an angle control and a feather. And that feather is what we really need. But I don't want it to go from black to transparent. I want it to go from black to white. So we're going to add another effect, this time called solid composite, right after linear wipe. And this just fills the transparency with whatever color we choose here. So what I've created is just a very simple gradient wipe effect with very easy to use controls. And this is where we're gonna be really clever. I learned this technique from Brady at Texture Labs, but what I wanna do is change the blend mode from normal down to hard mix. And as soon as I do that, we're going to get this really interesting effect on those polygons. You see where the black was on the gradient, it's making it pure black, and on the white, it's pretty much pure white, but in between, it's shrinking and growing that cell pattern because that gradient that we have on every single individual cell. Hard mix is a very special blend mode that changes the way that the pixels underneath it actually appear. And if we wipe this gradient across the screen, we're essentially making these tiles or these cells grow or shrink. Now at 100%, we're not getting to 100% white, and I need that to be completely white, so I'm gonna add one more effect called Minimax. and apply it to the matte layer, so that's the layer that has the cell pattern on it, and just increase the value up to 1, and that should clear up all of those little black lines. Now we can use our linear wipe control to go from black to white, increasing or decreasing the size of those polygons, and we can use the feather control to adjust the fall off essentially of that transition. So I'm gonna put that somewhere around here. We can always adjust the cell pattern size right here, maybe make that a little bit smaller. That's great. But I don't want this to go from just left to right. Again, looking at the video game reference, this goes from the center outwards. So I need to mirror this gradient. To do that, I'll go to my gradient layer and I'll search for the mirror effect and just apply it after the solid composite. And then I just need to grab the X value of that reflection center and back it up to 959. So that's right before the midpoint of the layer. And now with the linear wipe control, I can adjust this from pure white to pure black. And we can now use this layer as a matte for our source comp in this main composition. So I'm gonna grab the track matte pick whip from that source layer and choose the matte layer as the matte, but that's going to use it as an alpha matte. So it's just looking at the alpha channel of that layer and applying the same alpha channel to the source. We don't want that. We want to look at the luminosity. So we're going to click on that mask button and it switches to a sun icon, and we're now using a luma matte where it's paying attention to the brightness values of that source layer and applying it to the alpha channel. So now white pixels are fully opaque, black pixels are fully transparent, and we're getting that effect on top of our text layer. Now we're well on our way to recreating this effect, but if you want a solid foundation in After Effects, check out my masterclass, Launch into After Effects. It'll give you a complete understanding of this really complicated software, and you'll create 10 fun motion design projects that'll kickstart your motion design career. There's a link down in the description if you're interested in that. Now to animate these polygons, I could go back into our matte comp and adjust the transition completion, add some keyframes there, but then I'm gonna have to jump back and forth every time I wanna see a preview. Instead, we're gonna be a little bit more clever. Let's go back to that matte layer and right click on the property that I wanna animate, which is transition completion, and say add property to essential graphics. This will open up the essential graphics panel and give me a control that is now accessible in any instance of this pre-comp that's nested within another. So right away, we can see this new category, essential properties, and that linear wipe transition completion property is now adjustable inside this comp. And if I were to have 2 copies of this layer, I could adjust each one individually without affecting the other. So we're gonna use essential properties a lot for the rest of this tutorial. Let's go ahead and set some keyframes here. We'll start at a value of 0, and then we'll go forward in time a little bit and crank this up to probably 100%. And now those polygons are going to animate on. But what I'm noticing is that it's going in the opposite direction. We want it to start in the middle and move outwards. So we need to go to our matte and just essentially reverse it. So let's change the linear wipe angle to -90, and now this should move in the opposite direction from the center outwards. Perfect, that's looking great. I'm gonna give myself a little bit more room so we can see this larger. And again, looking at the reference footage, this is not white. Those polygons are kind of magenta and cyan. So let's grab a gradient ramp effect and drag that out onto our source comp, and we'll rename this source polygons while we're at it and make it a different color so it's nice and easy to identify. And I don't actually want to use this gradient as a gradient, I just want to use it to change the colors of the 2 halves. So if I put these handles right in the middle on the Y, so 540, and then I change the end of ramp to the center as well, so 960, and the start of ramp to 959, which would be just left of that. Now this half of the layer is black, this half of the layer is white, and I can adjust the colors to being that cyan color on the left and the magenta color on the right. And that looks really great. So now we've got those colored polygons coming out. We need that white fill to follow it. So let's duplicate these polygons and we'll call this fill. And let's just move our matte layer to the bottom and actually rename that polygons matte so we can keep track of things. And on this fill layer, we can take that track matte off. We're not going to use it. We can also take the gradient ramp off. So we're back to just our white text. Now this is going to appear slightly differently. Again, looking at the reference, it's not exactly the same as those colored polygons in the background. Instead, it kind of chunks on. And we're still gonna use the cell pattern effect to do this, but in a slightly different way. So I'm gonna duplicate this fill and we'll call this fill matte. And again, let's label these different colors. So we'll make both of these that color, and let's make both of these the same as well. So our fill matte, let's grab the cell pattern effect and apply it directly to it. Now by default, it's just gonna generate that pattern within the alpha channel, but there's one cell pattern that actually pays attention to the alpha channel. So crystallize or crystallize HQ is going to take that alpha channel and then apply the cell pattern to it. If I solo it, you can see what it's doing. The problem is those are semi-transparent pixels and I need them to be totally opaque so I can use this as an alpha matte. So let's first start by adding a fill color right on top so that everything is pure white. And then we'll add a levels effect right before that fill. And we're going to just switch this over to the alpha channel and change this alpha input white value all the way down to 1. This is essentially crushing the contrast of the alpha channel and making everything that isn't completely transparent completely opaque. Now we can use this as a matte for our text. So let's grab that track matte pick whip, set it to the fill matte, and this time make sure we're using an alpha matte, not a luma matte. Now we're not seeing all of the white text because that matte isn't quite big enough. So I'm gonna turn that back on for a second so we can see it and add another Minimax effect. So let's grab Minimax and put that before the cell pattern and then change the channel from color to alpha and color. And this will now work on the alpha channel. So I can expand this out a bit to make sure that it actually covers the entire text layer and then shut that visibility back off. Now we can see all of our text except for a little bit right there. Let's just increase that Minimax a little bit more and now we're good. Now, since our Crystallize HQ pattern doesn't have any of that gradation on those polygons, we can't use that same hard mix technique to reveal it. Fortunately, we don't have to. Look at that reference source again. It doesn't grow out, it kind of just chunks out. So the way that I'm gonna achieve this is by using the circle effect, which is something that doesn't show up all that often in my workflow, but it works perfectly for this. I'll bring it all the way out before Minimax, so at the top, and let me just show you what that effect is doing if I turn all the others off. It's literally just generating a circle on this layer and replacing the contents. Nothing else exists. But if I change the blend mode to stencil alpha, now it's just going to act as a matte. So if you ever needed a circle matte really quickly, this is a fantastic way to make that happen. With that done, let's turn our effects back on, and now we're going to see that this kind of chunks out from the center using that cell pattern. And we can always adjust the size or the random seed if we need something a little bit different. There's this random seed inside the evolution option, so feel free to change that and adjust things however you want. But now we can animate this matte using that radius value. So let's turn the visibility off one more time, change that radius down to 0 at the beginning, and we'll have it start right about here. So I'll set a keyframe, press U to bring up the other set of keyframes, and then go forward in time and increase the radius until we see that white fill over all of the colored version of that text. And now if I play this back, we see the polygons and then the white wipe out. That looks really great. But if we zoom in, we can see very closely that there's still some magenta and cyan showing up behind the white text. That's just an artifact of having two of the same alpha channels stacked on top of each other. So I'm gonna grab the polygons layer and just add a simple choker effect and increase that to a value of 1. And that will just shrink the alpha channel just enough so that when the white text is overlaid on top of it, it's not gonna show through. And just like that, we've recreated the transition in. Now, this gray background is a little boring, so I'm gonna grab a dot grid preset that I have for my background here and just drag it down. I'll call it BG for background and lock that layer. And now we can see this in a context that's just a little bit more interesting. That looks great. Let's move right on to the transition out, which again starts in the center and moves outward. And let's look at this reference footage one more time. Notice that the polygons don't start solid, they start cracked. So we're gonna recreate that as well. Let's start by transitioning this white text out. So we'll go to where that transition in ends, and we're going to animate it out again with a circle effect. So let's just collapse up all these other effects, duplicate the circle, and just check this invert circle on so that it's wiping off instead of on. I just need to move these keyframes forward in time so that they haven't happened yet. So we transition on and then we transition off. It could be interesting if we just easy ease into that second keyframe so that it kind of pops out a little bit more quickly, and that'll give us a little bit more time to showcase the cool polygons animation that we're about to create. So let's grab that polygons matte, and what we need to do is reverse it just like we reversed that circle transition. But we don't have the controls we need to do that in our essential properties yet. So let's jump back into there, and we need this wipe angle. So let's right click on it and say add property to essential graphics. Now I can set a keyframe for this initial value of -90 and convert this to a hold keyframe by pressing Control Alt or Command Option on a Mac and click on the keyframe. Now this value won't change or interpolate until it gets to the next keyframe value. So let's change this to a 90-degree value, but now we can grab the transition completion and back it off back down to 0, and it's gonna animate in exactly the same way we want it to. So let's set a 100% keyframe value right there and then move forward in time and change this back down to 0. And now we're gonna see that animation playing out. But remember, it needs to start cracked. We don't wanna see a solid version of these colored polygons. And the way that we can make that happen is by going back to our matte layer. Let's just adjust this completion a little bit so we can see it a little more solid. Remember, because we added these properties to Essential Graphics, they're not going to affect anything out in our main composition. But if I grab that solid composite white fill color and I just lower the brightness value, you see that that's also going to shrink those polygons in the same way that the gradient or that linear wipe is. So let's just add that property to our essential graphics as well. And now we can adjust that with keyframes. So let's set another keyframe for the first initial white value, convert that to a hold keyframe and align it to the start, and then change this to being whatever we need it to be in order to see those cracks. So something like that. I'll click OK. And honestly, I think this cell pattern is just a little bit too large. And again, I could just go into the matte to change the values here, but I'm just gonna go ahead and add that cell pattern to our essential graphics so I don't have to jump back and forth. Let's right click on size, say add property to essential graphics, and now I can just turn this down until I'm happy with the size. Everything else is completely procedural still. Now we need to make sure these keyframes are set before we see these colors, so let's just press U to bring up all of the keyframes. This is where the transition out starts for the fill, so let's back these 3 keyframes up to that point in time. So the circle goes out and those cracks fade away. So let's play through that. And I think that takes more time than it needs to, so I'm gonna back this up a little bit and see if that timing is a little bit better. I think it is. All right, that looks really good. I think I wanna adjust the feathering of that wipe on the initial transition in so that it's a little bit sharper so that fall off isn't quite as large. So let's add that property to our essential graphics as well. That's under the linear wipe feather. So add property to essential graphics. I'll rearrange this so the linear wipe controls are grouped together. And I think at the beginning we could lower this value a little bit. So it's a little bit tighter with the polygons, that looks good. But then for the out animation, I think that fall off should be wider. So let's set a keyframe there, convert it to hold, move it to the start, and then adjust this feather so that it's a much larger fall off, somewhere around 1,000, and just back that keyframe up to this section right here before the white transition starts to go away. I think that looks a lot better, but we wanna make these polygons look like they're falling, like gravity is taking over, and there is no built-in physics system with the cell pattern effect. So we're gonna fake it using displacement. I'm gonna collapse up all of my layers and make a new adjustment layer. So layer, new adjustment layer, and add the displacement map effect to it. And if you want to learn the ins and outs of this effect, just go watch the Effects of After Effects video on it. I go into great depth on how to use it. I want to go ahead and start by turning my max horizontal displacement down to 0. We only want to displace our pixels vertically. I also don't want this to affect the background, so I'm going to select all of these layers but the background and pre-compose it again. So Control-Shift-C or Command-Shift-C on a Mac, and I'll call this displacement and click OK. Now I need to go into that pre-comp. We're back to just our gray background, but that's okay. And right around at the point where the white text goes away is where we want to start a displacement. So I'm just gonna align my adjustment layer, which I'll rename displacement, to that point in time. So I press the left square bracket to move the end point of that layer to that point in time. And now we need an actual displacement map to tell this effect how it should be displacing the pixels. So we're going to use a very similar gradient to what we have for this cell pattern. So I'm actually gonna copy that gradient and paste it at the top of this layer. And the way the displacement effect works is by shifting the pixels of what it's being applied to based on the brightness values of the displacement map. So if I just grab that as my displacement map layer source, gradient, that first layer in the stack, and make sure that I'm also paying attention to the effects, now when I increase my vertical displacement, it's going to move the brightest pixels up and the darker pixels down. Now I don't want any pixels moving up, I just want them falling downwards, so I just need to change my colors around a little bit. Instead of white being in the middle, I want that to be black. So let's reverse our reflection angle so it's 180 degrees, and then just change our transition completion value until we have black in the middle. There we go. Now I can adjust this however I want with the feather or that transition completion to adjust how that displacement is actually affecting everything below it. We don't need to see this gradient anymore. I think I'm gonna be able to just adjust this by looking at the final result. But the value I wanna animate is this max vertical displacement because that will make everything start to fall down. So let's start at a value of 0 and set a keyframe. And then as this plays out, we want those polygons to fall down. So I'm gonna increase this value a bit. I'll press U to bring up those keyframes and easy ease out of the initial keyframe and play this back. And that's a pretty convincing gravity effect on all of those polygons. I think it needs to last a little bit longer, so I'll just drag this out. It also might be a little bit extreme. It might not need to fall that much, but honestly, I like the way that looks. So let's take a look at this as a whole. We see this transition into place, and then it transitions out and falls down. I think that's great. We could add one little last detail to those polygons if we go back to our matte and we add one more control to the essential graphics, which is this evolution option. So I'm gonna right click on it, add property to essential graphics, and then jump back to our displacement comp, which should go right in the middle here. And I can go to the essential graphics for that polygon's matte and animate that pattern evolution just on this transition out. So it's going to allow me to kind of shift those polygons around over time. So I'm just gonna increase that to around 180 degrees and then space this out to align with the transition completion and play that again. So now those polygons are moving around a little, probably too much. I'm gonna back that up to maybe 90 degrees, somewhere around there. And now there's a little bit of movement in addition to those polygons falling. So we've got this completely recreated effect and it's totally procedural. So we can go into our source comp. If we just open up that source comp, we could change this to say something else, like pre-comp plateau. And if we go back to our main comp, it's going to completely update to fit that text or whatever we stick inside. So if I bring in the Donkey Kong logo and I drag that into our source comp, I can just turn off the text, maybe make this a little bit bigger, and we jump back to the main comp, it's going to adapt to that alpha channel. The colors are obviously a little hard to look at, but the effect is completely transferred to this logo or any logo that you'd like to apply it to. And that's how I recreated the Donkey Kong Bananza text animation. And I pushed this a lot further in the project file that you can download for free in the description. So go ahead and check that out for yourself. And I added lots of customizable controls to the Mogurt, including different cell sizes for the 2 different lines of text. You can even choose how many star ratings you want to give to the terrain strength if that's what you're trying to do. Again, just check out the After Effects project file if you want to see how I set it all up. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Don't forget to check out my courses at jakeinmotion.com. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next one.